Mandy Boardman has always thought of herself as mature for her age. Even at 17 years old, she wasn't one to party or break the rules.
I was pretty responsible. I didn't really have time to be wild. I had a job, I had school, I played softball. I grew up a block away from the ball fields, and it was the place to be.
So in the spring of 1996, Mandy was excited to join a co-ed adult softball league within her close-knit Indianapolis community.
At 17, you become an adult when it comes to softball, so you have to join an adult league, and I decided that I would sub for a team, so I would get my fix.
Through the team, Mandy met all kinds of people, including 35-year-old David Wise.
Hi, my name's David. What's your name?
David worked at a shipping company, was a fine ball player, and seemed keen on offering Mandy extra support.
He was much older than me, but he was very nice to me and very polite. He would let me know how he appreciated me being there subbing for the team.
Good catch.
So when David made his true intentions known shortly after Mandy turned 18 by asking her out on a date, Mandy wasn't the least bit put off by their sizable age difference.
He just took me to a local Italian restaurant, and it was very quiet, nice. There was definitely an attraction there, and he always knew how to make me feel pretty and wanted.
Mandy and Dave were kind of an odd pairing, and it might have been because of the age difference. So to me, they were a little odd, but they seemed happy.
Unfortunately, not everyone was as thrilled as Mandy about her new boyfriend.
I was not a happy mommy, not happy at all. And I told her, I said, he's way too old for you. He could be your father. And she said, but he's not, and I was like, well, he could be, so that makes him too old for you.
I always felt my mother was overprotective. It was very normal of her to be concerned about who I was dating, which probably made me want to date him even more.
Mandy knew her feelings for David were different, but she became concerned when she noticed the amount of alcohol he seemed to consume regularly.
I was not a drinker. I did not do that. So being around somebody who was always doing it was just very uncomfortable. So I did tell him, I'm okay if you drink a couple beers every now and then, but the hard stuff had to stop.
You've been drinking way too much.
And to her pleasant surprise, David completely listened to her request.
He stopped drinking. He actually even stopped drinking beer. I felt if he's going to quit drinking for me, this is going to be great because he obviously wants to make me happy.
Within a year, it became obvious that marriage was in Mandy's near future.
David and I had spoken about marriage a couple times, and I said to myself, if I was going to get married, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be married forever.
That spring, Mandy wed David in a simple ceremony in front of family and friends, much to Mandy's mother's dismay.
It broke my heart because of the fact that I disliked him. I was really no part of it at all, none. And so I sat in the very last row, and I wore completely black.
It was not very encouraging. But I was in love with him, and we were going to get married, and not hell or high water was going to stop me.
But hell is exactly where Mandy would find herself. And when she slowly uncovered the layers of David's deceptions, it would become clear Mother does know best.
I almost lost my breath. This is some pretty weird, sick stuff that's going on.
I was just so dumbfounded and shocked. I never thought something like this would happen to me.
In the spring of 1998, Mandy Wise was determined to prove to everyone that her marriage to new husband David was a success.
That's what you do. You get married and you're married forever.
Mandy's not a quitter. She will try to her last breath to keep right on going, and she wanted everything to work out.
And indeed, it seemed it would. When nearly 9 months to her wedding day, Mandy delivered a healthy baby boy. And 1 year later, she became pregnant again, this time with a daughter. But by the time their little girl was born in December 2001, Mandy noticed that David seemed to be falling back into an old habit.
The drinking had gotten to a point where it became more often. People around us started noticing and making comments.
He was more boisterous, more obnoxious. If he was awake, he pretty much had a beer in his hand.
Fine. Fantastic.
Mandy had no clue why David had suddenly gone back on his word to stop drinking and decided to confront him one evening.
What is wrong with you?
I tried to explain to David that not only was I not wanting to accept his drinking,
Promise me.
but I didn't want an alcoholic around my children.
You're so sick. I'm so sick of this.
I'm yelling at him.
What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?
He's yelling back at me, and he smacked me. I was just so shocked. It was definitely a tipping point. He never apologized. And so from that point on, it seemed like arguments weren't just arguments. They were wars.
Soon, Mandy and David were arguing over everything.
David and I didn't have a very great, intimate relationship because I didn't want to do it.
You're so drunk and I don't want to sleep with you.
The attraction was gone. And he would just push and push and push. And so I would finally just be intimate so that we could get the argument over with and move on.
Mandy refused to admit defeat, so over the next few years, she did her best to ignore the husband-shaped elephant in the room. She started her own cleaning company and focused on her kids instead.
I think she wanted everybody to feel like she was in a good marriage. Most of us could see that it was a little rocky.
By 2005, with all Mandy had going on, she wasn't too alarmed when she began feeling incredibly groggy, even after getting a solid night's sleep.
I was finding myself in the middle of the day not being able to keep my eyes open. I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on with me.
There was many, many times that I called there at their house, and he would answer the phone. Well, she's asleep. I said, it's 4:30 in the afternoon. Why is she sleeping?
She's tired. She's working hard.
But when Mandy began to wake up in the middle of the night with a strange taste in her mouth, she couldn't help but take notice.
It was very bitter, very strong taste that was like stuck there and wouldn't go away.
Mandy's mind landed on the only possible explanation she could muster.
We had a canopy over our bed, and I thought, well, maybe there are spiders up in there, and they're coming down, and they're jumping in my mouth.
No, it's gross.
I thought, this is crazy, but what else could it be? David never seemed very concerned. It was like, oh, well, you must be eating spiders.
Go back to sleep.
As the months went by, Mandy continued to feel exhausted. By Thanksgiving 2006, she was notably tired, but looking forward to the holiday.
My father was coming. I was very excited to be cooking for my whole family.
Mandy went to sleep that night feeling happy for the first time in a long time, until she suddenly awoke to a blinding sensation.
I was woken up to a light in my face. But I look, and then I see the light go away, and I watch my husband run away.
What are you doing?
I saw him on the other side of the bed stuffing some stuff underneath the mattress. I'm like, what's going on here?
What is that? Show me. What did you do?
In the fall of 2006, Mandy Wise woke up in a panic when she caught her husband suspiciously hiding something under the mattress.
And I'm like, what's going on here? What are you doing?
Mandy ran over to the other side of the bed and discovered what David had been concealing.
I found this vial and this dropper.
What is this?
The vial has a chalky-looking liquid in it. He pretty much just sat there in silence like I was some kind of crazy person waking up in a rage.
You are overreacting.
Well, at this time, I have the taste in my mouth, the taste that I had before. So I ask, did you do this?
Have you been putting this in my mouth?
And he's avoiding everything that I'm asking him.
Mandy, you were acting crazy.
After hours of not getting anywhere with David, Mandy decided she needed space.
So I went across the street to Nicole's house to tell her what had happened.
She was crying. She didn't know what to do. I told her I didn't feel that that was right. I would be furious with my husband if he did that to me because it was very evident he was drugging her. He was giving her something.
A few hours later, Mandy returned home, ready to face David.
I asked him what was in that vial, and he told me that he had crushed up some Xanax to help me sleep. I said, I don't understand why you're trying to help me sleep when I am already sleeping.
You've been giving me sleeping pills? I have been sleeping fine.
And he told me that this is what I needed.
That's why she'd been so tired and lethargic and sleeping so much. And, you know, above and beyond the fact that he did what he did, what if he gave her too much? I just couldn't believe he was doing that to her.
So Mandy made David promise to never take her health into his own hands again.
I just asked him to please kindly stop. He was like, okay, I'll stop.
I won't do it again.
You promise me.
After 8 years of marriage, Mandy wasn't sure what to think.
There were so many things that were going through my head, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to make my marriage work, so I had to believe him.
So in the winter of 2007, when Mandy awoke to a familiar light shining in her face, she was completely distraught.
I had already been through this, and I felt like I knew what was going on, so I jump up immediately. Well, David takes off.
Shocked by his audacity, Mandy chased David out to the garage.
Where is it?
I said, show me what's underneath the cushion. And he pulls out the vial and the dropper. I was so angry.
Mandy knew David had been drugging her yet again. The question was, why? As the young mother of 2 children, Mandy wasn't sure what to do next. For the next 3 months, she and David barely spoke as she tried to work out a plan in her head.
I didn't want my kids to know what happened. I had to figure out what was going on here.
But in the fall of 2008, the reason behind all the troubling events became clear.
I was home from work, and David had left his cell phone at home. So I decided I'm gonna go ahead and investigate. So I start looking through his phone, and I'm looking through texts and phone calls.
And the second Mandy opened his videos file, her heart stopped.
What I saw in the videos was nothing that I had ever expected to see in my entire life. It was horrible.
Oh my God.
Mandy didn't have much choice but to show the world what he really was.
In the fall of 2008, after discovering that her husband David had been drugging her in her sleep, Mandy Wise decided to have a look at the videos on his cell phone.
I found 3 videos. I
Oh my gosh.
saw David having sexual relations with me while I was sleeping. I looked like a corpse. It was horrible. It was almost like necrophilia. I thought, how in the world did this happen? I don't remember this.
Then it hit her. This was the reason he was drugging her.
I felt very angry. This whole time, he was lying to me, telling me that I need what he's giving me. Now I finally had proof that something seriously messed up was happening to me. I tried to send them to my email, and I couldn't figure it out on the phone. So I recorded the videos on the phone with the camcorder. That way I knew I had them.
When David arrived home, Mandy was quick to confront him.
What did you do? You
His reaction was almost like no reaction. Like he wasn't surprised that they were there.
Mandy no longer doubted what she needed to do next. After 11 years of marriage, she filed for divorce and David moved out.
It was very hard to take that step to let everybody know that I failed and that my marriage didn't work and break apart my family. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. My kids. They were just devastated.
I thought he was sick and twisted, and I asked her, are you going to take this to the police? And she said, I don't think I can. I don't want anybody to know this. He's gone. It's done. This is not going to happen to me anymore.
By October 2009, Mandy and David's divorce was final. It was difficult for Mandy to acknowledge how wrong she'd been about David.
I feel like there's somewhere where David went off the grid, and people like that are capable of doing anything. And I thought if he could do this to his wife, then he could probably do it to anybody. So I decided to make the phone call to the Indianapolis Police Department.
David Wise was arrested in August 2011 and charged with 1 count of rape and 5 counts of deviant sexual behavior. Without physical evidence, however, he could not be charged with drugging Mandy. David pled not guilty, and on April 28, 2014, after 3 years of legal battles, he went to trial. Along with the video evidence, one of David's own friends testified against him.
David called the wife of one of his friends and made some statements that something was happening to Mandy while she was asleep.
The witness told the jury David said to her that he had no sex life with his wife and admitted to drugging her to have his way.
If she's not going to give it, I'm going to take it.
He explained to her that he would do it so that later he could watch the videos and enjoy them during his own time. It was just unfathomable.
Even David himself testified that he had given his wife drugs for 3 years.
He had been prescribed Xanax and Ambien on a number of different occasions. David said he was experiencing lapses in judgment due to drinking.
It was more than enough evidence, and 2 days later, David Wise was convicted on all charges. But much to Mandy's surprise, the judge imposed a light sentence: 20 years with 12 years suspended and 8 years in home detention with a GPS monitor.
I was devastated. This man was able to go home and lead his life. I was terrified.
You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, how can they do that?
The sentence he got was for people with limited or no criminal history. Did I agree with it? I didn't. Spousal rape is a very serious crime, and anytime an adult commits a crime like this, they need to be held accountable.
But 2 months after the sentencing, David failed to charge his GPS monitor for 6 hours.
They found him at home, and he claimed that his battery had just died.
The court found he had violated his home detention rules and revised his sentence to 5 years in prison and 3 years home detention.
I almost couldn't control myself because I just was so grateful for the peace. I felt like it was finally over.
Today, Mandy knows coming forward exposed the ugly truth in her marriage that she fought so hard to hide.
I feel like what I have done has brought attention to spousal rape. And now people are becoming more aware. Everybody needs to know that if you don't give consent, there is no consent.
With everything that she's had to do, I'm very proud of her for coming forward and saying, this is me. It happened to me. I'm very proud of her for that. It takes a lot of courage.
I never thought something like this would happen to me. But I'm definitely still strong-headed. And I want to make sure that whatever I do makes a difference.
In the summer of 1998, high school graduate Tabitha Howe was excited to strike out on her own, moving to a house with a great group of friends.
I worked right across the street at the restaurant, and we did what teenagers do. We all hung out, played video games, watched movies. We just had a good time.
But Tabitha's newest roommate, Scott Wellington, didn't seem to fit in.
Scott was working at a grocery store as a bagger, and at first I didn't like him. He was only 17, just a young kid who was arrogant.
Before long, Tabitha was pleased to see that Scott had a charming side.
He seemed like he was caring. He would notice, like, if I did my nails, which most men wouldn't notice. He picked up the house while we were at work. He seemed like a decent person. We just became very close.
Tabitha made it known she was interested in Scott, and they transitioned effortlessly from just friends into a couple.
I felt like maybe this could be something bigger. Maybe we could progress in our relationship and start building a life together. He was my first real love.
They got along well. They would also laugh at each other and tease each other. They were tickled to be together.
Over the next 2 years, Tabitha and Scott found a place of their own and spent every moment together.
We weren't rushing things. I felt I knew who he was. Everything was going pretty good.
But something was about to change all of that.
I found out I was pregnant. I was scared. I was really scared. I knew what it took to take care of a baby.
Tabitha wasn't sure how to tell Scott.
All right, sweetheart, I gotta go to work.
Okay, hon.
You all right? What's wrong?
I'm pregnant.
And he just stopped
What?
and just kind of froze, which made me panic a little.
Okay. You're pregnant. Let's do this thing.
But then he was like really excited about it. He genuinely seemed very happy. And he said he always wanted a family. And I think that Scott thought it was definitely going to be cake and just really fun, and I knew it wasn't like that at all.
9 months later, the young couple welcomed a baby boy.
Scott was a good dad. He was a really good dad. Tabitha was a very good mother. And she was happy, I was happy.
I never wanted kids. But once you hold your baby for the first time, there's nothing else that can take that place.
And by November of 2002, Tabitha had more surprising news for Scott.
I said, "You're going to be a daddy again." And he was absolutely thrilled. We already had one perfect little boy, and now we're going to have another baby.
To financially prepare, Tabitha found a job in the accounting department of a local store.
I was working nights, and Scott was working days. He went on to become a machinist, and he was making decent money. It was enough that we could get by.
But the excitement of another baby was soon eclipsed by a troubling new side of Scott.
Our son was learning to walk, and we had a small shelf up against the wall, and he grabbed onto it to steady himself, and it ended up falling on top of him. He was absolutely fine, but Scott got very angry.
Put this here.
I just thought he was being protective, but I'd never seen him really get angry before.
Then in March of 2003, life took a turn for the worse when Scott announced he'd been laid off from his job. For the next few months, Scott bounced from job to job, but nothing seemed to stick.
I would pick up any available shifts at work, but he did not do anything. He didn't do the dishes, he didn't pick up the house. He was very reluctant to actually get a job and just make some money to help out.
She was very frustrated by, always having to clean up whatever mess that was there.
Finally, in July 2003, in time for the arrival of their second son, Scott found another good job as a machinist in Greenville, just across the New Hampshire state line.
He seemed really happy. He seemed to get a little bit of that spark back and talking like things are going to get better.
But Tabitha would soon learn that with every new high came an unbearable low.
It was a roller coaster ride. I was really scared.
And gradually, Tabitha would be swept into a whirlwind of deception so shocking she wondered if she would even survive.
I was stunned. I couldn't quite wrap my head around what had happened.
You see this stuff in books and TV shows, you don't think it's going to happen to you.
In July 2003, after giving birth to their second son, Tabitha Howe was relieved when her boyfriend Scott Wellington landed a promising new job as a machinist in the quaint town of Greenville.
Greenville, it seemed nice and quiet. It's a small little town. We found a cute little 2-bedroom apartment. It was so close to the post office. We were told we had to get a post office box because the mail delivery service would not deliver our mail. Scott always had the keys with him, and he would always get the mail.
With an additional mouth to feed, the couple began pulling long hours at work to support their growing family. And the stress of rarely seeing each other began to take its toll.
We were kind of like ships passing in the night. It put up a lot of barriers in between us. During Christmas, I would work until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and he would accuse me of being out cheating on him.
Where have you been?
I was at work.
It got to the point where I would have to print out the times that I punched in at work and punched out. I felt like Scott wanted to have complete control over me.
Tabitha was sad, you know, and she just didn't know how to prove to him that she wasn't with other men.
Don't walk away from me.
Tabitha didn't know what to make of this new side to Scott. But even more surprising, one day that December, Scott completely blindsided her.
Scott talked about getting married. It was not something that I have ever wanted. It's just a piece of paper to me. But that's what he wanted. He wanted a real family. So he went and got a ring.
Will you marry me?
Wow.
We had 2 kids. Obviously, this was something that was long-term.
Yeah.
But we never set a date. We just stayed engaged, and I think it was really more in his mind than anything.
And after giving birth to a daughter in 2005, and then another little girl in 2009, it seemed their family was complete.
I knew I didn't want any more kids. 4 was more than enough. Scott was fine with that. It seemed like things were getting a lot better.
Then Scott arrived home one day early from work and dropped a bombshell.
Why are you home from work so early?
I quit.
I was just dumbfounded. And I said, "What do you mean you quit? How are we going to support the kids?"
You know we need the health insurance.
I know that. Just get off my back about it.
It turned into a big fight, and he yelled and he screamed.
As Tabitha took on more hours at work, she struggled to understand why, out of the blue, Scott tossed his family into yet another financial storm. It wasn't until January of 2010 when Tabitha showed Scott a listing for a machinist job at a local company called C&M that he finally took action.
It seemed like a really great company. He called them. He went down for an interview. They ended up hiring him.
Tabitha hoped their troubles were finally behind them. But they were just getting started when Scott made a horrifying decision that would not only devastate Tabitha, but would betray his entire company.
He just sounded like he wanted to destroy her.
I was terrified. He was a completely different person.
In 2010, Tabitha Howe was thrilled when her fiancé, Scott Wellington, landed a solid job, one that enabled him to support their 4 young children, ages 1 through 9. But despite Scott making good money, he seemed to grow more irritable by the day.
We can't afford more than 1 line.
And before long, his controlling streak returned with a vengeance.
Scott, I really need a phone.
Scott got the home phone shut off, and that's when he really started to isolate me from everybody.
I got her another cell phone, and I paid the bill. He was not happy about that because there was nothing he could do.
And though Scott wanted more control, He didn't seem to want to spend more time with Tabitha and the kids.
He would get up really early and say he was going to work, like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
One time, I brought him to work, and I said, we'll have lunch with you. We'll have a little picnic outside. Oh, no, you can't bring the kids there.
No.
There could be metal scraps in the yard.
This would be dangerous for the kids.
He made it sound like it was concern for the kids.
Then, in December 2010, just in time for the holidays, the pendulum swung again.
I have a little bit of a surprise for you.
He came home and he just started pulling money out of his pockets. And he said that he got a $3,000 bonus from work. I said, really? He said, I helped them get a really big contract. It was fabulous. So I was like, well, it's going to be a really good Christmas for the kids.
But when Christmas Eve finally rolled around, Scott had plans of his own.
Hey, sweetheart, I think I'm gonna take off and hang out with the guys for a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
I said, just don't be too late because, we have a lot to do. He was like, okay, He gave me a kiss. He left.
Boom! Gotcha.
Tabitha and I were online playing a game. It was just sort of a way to pass the time.
When Scott returned home later that night, it was clear something other than the holiday spirit had possessed him.
I was sitting on the computer. I was chatting with Emmy. And Scott stormed back into the house, just in a rage, just angry, yelling.
I know what you've been doing.
He started to accuse me of cheating again.
You want her? You can take her.
And then he picked me up and threw me across the living room.
You could hear the physical tussle. You knew a physical altercation was going on. The microphone just sort of hit the desk with a thump. And then it just went silent. So I sat there, sort of stunned, and immediately started trying to call her.
I was scared. I was really scared. Now all the kids are out of bed. I said, I'm calling the police. He took off. I was terrified, and I called my mom.
She called me, crying, and said that he just went off the deep end, and he had just left on foot. She asked me to come up there, and I did.
She finally texted me. She was okay, that her mom was on the way, and that he had left.
Tabitha struggled to understand what had prompted the attack. But when Scott returned later that night, apparently calmed down, Tabitha let him stay.
He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened.
I'm so sorry.
I didn't really want him back in the house, but it was Christmas Eve. I couldn't let him ruin Christmas for the kids. It's supposed to be a magical time, not the day your father leaves.
But soon what happened that Christmas would be the least of Tabitha's worries, when her life took another dramatic turn, one that would end with a chilling discovery.
He's devious, crooked, he's a sociopath.
There's a very small percentage of people that are just absolutely evil. It shocked me.
I was terrified, and I thought, was this his plan all along?
On Christmas Eve 2010, Tabitha Howe was suddenly attacked by her partner of 12 years, Scott Wellington. But she allowed him to come back home, if only for the sake of their 4 young children.
Scott was very quiet when he came back. He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened, but he never offered an explanation. I made the decision that night that things were completely over between the two of us, and I just needed to figure out what the next step was.
No, and do not touch me.
And 3 months later, in March 2011, Tabitha couldn't take it any longer.
It's over.
We had a really big fight. Everything just came out. I just couldn't handle it anymore. I was all done. I just needed him gone. I threw him out.
Over the next month, Tabitha wanted nothing to do with Scott. But with the children, it wasn't possible.
Scott was supposed to come and see the kids for Easter, and we had agreed upon that.
As Tabitha prepared for the visit, she kept busy by running a few errands.
I was going to the grocery store, and I stopped to get the mail.
Getting the mail had always been Scott's job. So when Tabitha opened their P.O. box, she was floored at the number of unpaid bills. But it was what she found in another envelope that tore her world apart.
There was a card in there, and I figured it's from my grandparents to the kids. I didn't think anything of it, so I opened it up, and it's a sympathy card with some money orders in it. And I start reading it. "Dear Scott, we're so sorry for the loss of your wife. You and your kids are in our prayers." I'm like, who is this for? You know, they must have made a mistake. Somebody sent this to the wrong address. I have no idea what's going on. But then I kind of started to wonder, was Scott planning on killing me? Was this his plan all along? I was terrified. Why would he tell people I was dead? I called Scott. I said, "Don't come and see the kids. Don't come to my house. Don't come anywhere near me."
The following Monday morning, Tabitha spoke with Scott's boss, who was surprised to see her alive and well. As they discussed the circumstances surrounding the card, Tabitha learned the situation was far worse than she imagined. Not only had Scott told his colleagues she'd passed away, he had done so after weaving a year-long tragic tale about a mythical battle with cancer.
Scott told them that I had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and that I was getting sicker and sicker by the day. He then told them that I had to have a double mastectomy and that it wasn't looking good.
In turn, his company had given Scott almost $7,000 in donations to help offset the mounting medical costs, plus several weeks of paid time off. Right around the time Tabitha kicked him out, Scott told his company that she had died.
Certain things started to make sense. He didn't want me to go out. He didn't want me to be seen by people. He didn't want me to bring the kids to work for lunch because I was supposedly sick at home, withering away and dying. He wanted to have complete control over me and isolate me.
That day, Tabitha got a restraining order against Scott, while Scott's boss contacted police and pressed charges.
The owner of the company explained to me he had to report a theft, and the story of the theft was bizarre, to say the least. I had Scott come in for an interview, and he didn't try to lie or deny anything that had happened. He painted the picture that the family was hard on times, and he was trying to make ends meet as best he could. That was his motivation.
Never supposed to get to this level.
Scott was charged with 2 counts of theft by deception, one for the amount of $5,000 and $2,000 for previous donations.
I knew about the $3,000 that he had gotten at Christmas, but the other money I knew nothing about. I don't know exactly what he was doing with it.
On May 16, 2011, Scott accepted a deal and pled guilty to 1 count of theft by deception, claiming he needed the money to support his family.
I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. He says he did it to support his family. But we didn't see that money.
Scott only spent a few days in jail and was placed on administrative probation.
I realize he didn't kill anybody, but he took advantage of people. I think he should have gone away for a while. I do.
It's absolutely ridiculous. These people were trying to help somebody out who they thought was having a difficult time, and he didn't care. That's sick. Absolutely just sick.
Today, Tabitha still struggles to understand how and why her teenage love turned into such a master manipulator.
Scott was very smart in the way that if he lied to you, he could remember that. And he would continue with that lie for as long as it took. And thinking about not getting married, that was definitely when I knew I made the right choice.
As time passed, Tabitha tried to move beyond all the hurt and devastation Scott caused. She focuses on being a survivor.
Tabitha is fantastic. She's doing very well with the kids. The kids are all good. Every day she gets better and better.
He tried to destroy me, but I'm back to who I originally was, and I believe I'm stronger for it. I have a full-time job. I take care of my kids. I can do this on my own.
The night the rain came down like shards of glass over the Gulf Coast, the kind of night Florida residents still whisper about 2 decades later, the kind of night when headlights looked like floating ghosts on the drenched asphalt and sirens sliced through the storm as if they were trying to outrun something darker than the thunder. It was on that night, September 14, 2003, that a single 911 call shattered the silence of a quiet suburban block in Clearwater, a call that would later become the first line of every headline screaming cold case, mysterious disappearance, community in shock. But on that night, all anyone heard was the operator's strained voice asking the caller to repeat herself, because the wind was howling so violently it nearly swallowed the words, "And my daughter, she never came home." And somewhere beyond the trembling porch lights, a story was already unfolding in shadows. A story that would take 2 decades to finally unmask the face hiding beneath it. The house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with palm trees bent sideways by the storm, as if nature itself was recoiling from what was about to break open. Officers pushed through the sheets of rain to reach the front door, where a mother stood barefoot, shaking, clutching an empty backpack that still smelled of sunscreen and school hallways. Inside, the lights flickered. The air held a strange quiet, the kind that clings to walls after something unspoken has just slipped through. The girl's bedroom was untouched, a half-finished poster on the desk, a stuffed dolphin curled against an unmade bed, drawers closed, window locked. No struggle. No forced entry. No sign of where she had gone in the small space between sunset and the storm rolling in like a warning. Neighbors said they saw nothing. Some claimed they weren't even home. A few mentioned a red truck idling at the intersection earlier that afternoon, but no one could agree on the model or the driver. A storm blurs memories. Fear erases the rest. The officers combed through the drenched sidewalks, their flashlights swinging across puddles that reflected only their own uncertainty. Helicopters couldn't fly through the storm. Search dogs lost the trail as soon as they reached the soaked playground 2 blocks away. Every step of the search ended in the same hollow echo: missing girl, no leads, no witnesses, no answers. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a neighborhood washed clean except for the one thing that wouldn't fade: the sense that something had taken her, something that moved quietly, deliberately, with purpose. The media arrived within hours, cameras rolling, reporters speaking with the hushed urgency reserved for tragedies that strike without warning. Headlines flashed: a Florida cold case begins, girl vanishes in the storm. The image of her school portrait, taped to lampposts and store windows, became a haunting banner over the days that followed, as volunteers scoured empty lots, retention ponds, roadside ditches. But Florida is vast, the wetlands deep, and secrets sink fast in places where water never stops moving. The detectives assigned to the case were seasoned, but they felt the weight of this one immediately. A child disappearing in a storm is a narrative that writes itself into the bones of a community, a wound that keeps reopening. They pieced together her last known movements. She had stayed late at school for choir practice, walked out with 2 classmates, parted ways at the crosswalk. One of the girls said she saw headlights behind them, a slow-moving vehicle, creeping, maybe following. She didn't think much of it then. Children rarely recognize danger until it's too close to run from. Security cameras in 2003 weren't what they are today. The footage from the school's lot was grainy, warped by water damage from the storm, and all detectives could make out was a blurry shape, a truck, maybe red, maybe not, pausing behind a tree line before disappearing altogether. One officer thought he saw the outline of a bumper sticker. Another argued it was just glare. The footage became the first ghost of the case, replayed endlessly, dissected obsessively, yet yielding nothing. The mother's interview was the second ghost. She sat at the dining table with trembling hands, answering every question with the haunted clarity of someone replaying her last conversation with her daughter over and over until it blurred into a single painful loop. She had told her to be home by 7. She had heated leftover pasta. She had checked the window when the storm rolled in. She had expected any second to hear the door open, the backpack drop to the floor, the familiar voice calling out. But the seconds stretched, and then the storm swallowed the night, and the silence became unbearable. Detectives searched the family's history, the neighborhood, the school, the father working out of state, the friends, the ex-boyfriend of a neighbor girl, the maintenance workers in the area. Nothing. Every path led to dust. Every interview ended with uncertainty. Rumors sprouted like weeds, a runaway theory, then dismissed, an abduction theory, but with no trail, a stranger in a storm theory, terrifying in its simplicity but impossible to prove. Weeks became months. The posters faded in the sun. The leads dried up. The case file thickened with notes, interviews, dead ends. A reward was offered, hotlines rang with tips that fizzled into nothing, psychics wrote letters, distant relatives called with dreams they believed were clues. The detectives followed every thread, even the implausible ones, because cases like this don't allow the luxury of ignoring anything. But 2004 came with no breakthrough. Then 2005. The girl's bedroom remained untouched, a capsule of the night she vanished. The community carried the case like a shadow. Parents who once let their children walk home from school now circled the block to pick them up. Porch lights stayed on later. Neighborhood watch groups doubled in size, scanning for the red truck that had become the town's phantom. Every new storm rekindled the memory of the one that had taken her. Headlines re-emerged each anniversary, a cold case still haunting Clearwater. No answers. No closure. Her mother appeared on new segments, her voice softer each year, like the grief was hollowing her out from the inside. By the 10th year, the case had become a quiet ache, the kind people stop talking about out loud but never truly forget. The evidence box gathered dust in storage, the tapes degrading, the photos yellowing. Detectives retired, transferred, or moved on. New officers skimmed the old files but saw nothing they could resurrect. The case was labeled inactive, a word that felt colder than unsolved. But what no one knew then, what would shock the entire state 20 years later, was that a single overlooked detail, buried deep in the case files, had been waiting like a fuse. A scrap of a storm-soaked item recovered near the playground, catalogued, photographed, dismissed as unrelated. In 2003, DNA testing was limited. In 2023, it had become a weapon capable of slicing through time. And when a newly formed cold case unit reopened the evidence box, when the sample was retested with advanced forensic sequencing, when the results lit up the screen with a match that should never have existed, everything that had been dormant for 20 years jolted awake. But in 2003, none of that was known. Only the absence was real. Only the questions. Only the feeling that something in the storm had watched, waited, taken. The detectives met in dim briefing rooms, tracing and retracing timelines, arguing over theories. One believed it was a targeted abduction. Another insisted it was opportunistic, a predator using the storm as camouflage. A third suggested the possibility of someone local, someone familiar enough with the area to disappear without leaving a trail. The mother clung to hope the same way the community clung to fear, tightly, desperately, unwilling to let go even when logic demanded it. Candlelight vigils became tradition. School memorials were held. A tree was planted near the playground, its branches twisting upward as if trying to reach toward something that had slipped too far out of grasp. Reporters moved on to newer stories, until a discovery in 2007 reignited the headlines. A shoe, identical to the pair the girl had last been seen wearing, washed up near a drainage canal 10 miles from her neighborhood. The tread matched. The wear pattern matched. But there was no blood, no DNA, no trace of who or what had moved it there. Some believed it was dropped by the current. Others suspected it had been placed intentionally, like someone was taunting the investigators. The mystery deepened, and with it, the legend, the Storm Girl, the Clearwater Phantom, the 2003 cold case no one could crack. For years, the red truck remained the only phantom clue, the single thread connecting the rumors to the fear. Children drew it in chalk during recess. Teenagers used it as a ghost story. Adults mentioned it in low voices, as though speaking too loudly might summon whoever had been behind the wheel. But the truck never reappeared. No traffic cam, no witness, no report ever pulled it back into the light. And yet, beneath the surface of the case, beneath the grief, the fear, the uncertainty, there was always a sense that the truth was still out there, submerged like the dark bottom of a Florida canal. Waiting. Watching. Unmoving. 20 years would pass before someone dared to stir that water again. But on that night in 2003, as the storm finally broke, as the last patrol car left the cul-de-sac, as the mother sat in her daughter's darkened room whispering prayers into the silence, no one knew they were standing at the beginning of a mystery that would take decades to unravel. No one knew the suspect was already hiding in plain sight. No one knew the case would freeze into one of Florida's most haunting cold cases, until the day the truth clawed its way back through the cracks time had tried to seal shut. The years following the girl's disappearance unfolded like a long corridor lined with locked doors, each one hiding a question no one could answer, each one echoing with the footsteps of detectives who walked back and forth until their theories wore thin. Clearwater grew, families came and went, new houses rose on quiet blocks, and yet the cul-de-sac where the storm had once swallowed a child remained the same, untouched by time in a way that felt almost unnatural. People said the light there always looked dimmer, as if the shadow of 2003 still hovered over the lawns. Neighbors avoided walking their dogs past the house after dark. Some insisted they could still hear the faint ringing of the mother's voice calling her daughter's name into the storm. Myths grow where answers should be, and in the absence of truth, the community built its own stories. One of those stories began with a man who used to jog through the neighborhood every morning. He claimed that for months after the disappearance, he passed a figure standing near the retention pond at dawn, tall, hooded, unmoving. The man never turned his head, never stepped forward, never looked up. Just stood there staring at the water like he was waiting for something to resurface. The jogger mentioned it once to police, but they dismissed it as a grieving father or a curious neighbor. Around the same time, a teenage boy reported a stranger knocking on his door late at night asking for directions to an address that didn't exist. The boy said the stranger drove an old truck. He thought it might have been red, but it was too dark to be sure. Every detail was always too dark to be sure. That became the theme of the case. A trail made of shadows, footprints that dissolved as soon as someone tried to follow them. Inside the department, the case file grew into a stack that detectives called the storm binder. Officers rotated in and out of the unit, each one opening the binder with the optimism that they would be the one to find the thread everyone else had missed. They read reports by lamplight, replayed interviews, studied the grainy footage of the school lot until their eyes blurred. They debated the meaning of a faint reflection, the possibility of a distorted license plate shape, the timing of the choir practice ending. They analyzed whether the storm was used as cover by someone who had been watching her long before that night. They wondered whether the disappearance was planned or improvised. They argued about the red truck the way ghost hunters argue about shadows in old photographs, believing and doubting at the same time. One detective in particular, a man known for his stubbornness, refused to let the case fade. He kept a map pinned to his office wall with every tip, every sighting, every theory marked in colored tags. Lines crisscrossed between schools, parks, drainage canals, abandoned lots, gas stations. He believed the answer lay somewhere in the spaces between those lines, in the empty pockets where no one had searched deeply enough. He interviewed the mother dozens of times, always gently, always with the same questions phrased differently. He visited her on the anniversary of the disappearance every year, hoping she would remember something new. She never did. Trauma locks memories away, and sometimes the storm inside the mind is worse than the storm outside. In 2012, a rumor spread that a fisherman at a nearby lake had found a backpack tangled in his net. People held their breath, thinking the storm binder would finally open to a new chapter. But the backpack belonged to a runaway from another county. The community exhaled in disappointment. The mother collapsed into her chair as if the weight of hope itself had become too much. Grief is not linear. It loops, shifts, deepens, resurfaces. Each false lead reopened the wound. Each disappointment reminded everyone how fragile the truth was. By 2015, even the detective with the map on his wall began losing sleep. He told colleagues that he dreamed of the girl standing at the edge of a storm, asking him why he hadn't found her. Dreams like that eat away at a man. He requested access to evidence storage late at night, pulling out the box labeled with the victim's initials. He laid out each item under the fluorescent lights: the shoes, the comb from her backpack, the rain-soaked scrap recovered near the playground on the night she vanished. He stared at that scrap for longer than he should have. A piece of weathered fabric, torn, color faded. It had been found caught between roots at the base of a tree. At the time, detectives assumed it belonged to a discarded toy or a stray article of clothing swept up by the wind. There were no stains, no identifying marks, nothing that screamed significance. In 2003, it was just debris. In 2015, it was still just debris. He logged it back into the box, unaware that it carried the single clue that would one day unravel everything. But before that unraveling, the town went through another wave of fear, sparked by a case only loosely related yet deeply reminiscent of the Storm Girl. In 2018, a young woman jogging near a wooded trail north of Clearwater reported a truck tailing her for several minutes before speeding off. She described the color as a reddish. Police investigated but found nothing. Still, the headlines blazed: "A red truck resurfaces, Community Four's cold case connection." The old wounds reopened. Calls flooded the tip line. People claimed to have seen variations of red trucks everywhere, on highways, in parking lots, at construction sites. The noise drowned out the truth. Most of those trucks were harmless. One wasn't, but it would take years for anyone to realize which one. The mother aged visibly during these years. Her hair turned silver. Her voice softened. She still kept her daughter's room intact, dusting the shelves, washing the curtains, leaving the stuffed dolphin by the pillow. She spoke at schools about safety, about awareness, about hope. But her eyes always drifted toward the window during those talks, as if she was still waiting to hear footsteps coming up the walkway. Hope can be cruel that way. It keeps you breathing long after you should have collapsed. Meanwhile, Clearwater developed new technology. Surveillance systems improved. License plate databases expanded. DNA processing advanced in ways unimaginable during the early 2000s. And in 2021, the police department formed a specialized cold case unit with the goal of re-examining dormant cases using new forensic tools. The storm binder was placed on their desk. They opened it with fresh eyes. They reviewed every page with clinical precision. And when they reached the evidence list, something caught their attention: the fabric scrap, logged without annotation beyond a possible unrelated debris. They scanned it, measured it, photographed it. When they opened the storage box, they held it gently between gloved fingers, not knowing they were touching the thread that would unravel 2 decades of silence. But the revelation was still far away. In 2003, no one had the ability to pull DNA from such a degraded sample. In 2021, they could. But before the testing, before the breakthrough, before the suspect's face was finally pulled into the spotlight, the cold case unit had to understand the landscape of the original investigation. They visited the cul-de-sac. They interviewed neighbors again. Most had moved, but a few remembered fragments. One old man said he recalled seeing a truck during the storm, driving slowly, almost like it was scanning the houses. He said the headlights looked too calm for weather like that. Like the driver wasn't fighting the rain but gliding through it. Details like that linger in the human mind, unsettling, half-formed, but unforgettable. The cold case team studied old storm data, mapping the disappearance against real-time radar from 2003 to understand visibility, road access, traffic conditions. They used digital reconstruction to simulate the neighborhood that night. They analyzed the possibility of an abduction occurring within the narrow timeline between leaving school and the storm's full descent. They ruled out possibilities. They built new ones. Soon their entire office felt like a crime scene suspended in time. But the man who had remained hidden, the one who had slipped through the cracks of 2003, was still living quietly somewhere in Florida, carrying a secret that had rotted inside him for 2 decades. He blended in with crowds, paid his bills, moved from county to county, never drawing suspicion. Predators often evolve. They adapt to silence. They wear normalcy like a mask. And every time anniversary reports aired on TV, every time he passed a newspaper stand, every time the girl's school portrait appeared on a memorial broadcast, he looked away. He never spoke of that night. But guilt doesn't disappear, it burrows. It festers. It waits. Meanwhile, the cold case team prepared the evidence for retesting. The mother was notified. She sat in the same chair she had been interviewed in 20 years earlier. Her hands shook the same way. But this time, there was a glimmer of something fragile in her eyes. Not hope, something smaller, more dangerous, the possibility of hope. When the fabric scrap was finally sealed for the lab, one detective whispered almost to himself, "Let's see what you've been hiding." He didn't know then that the answer wasn't just a clue, it was a name. A name that would shock Clearwater, a name no one had ever suspected, a name tied to a man who had lived less than 2 miles from the girls' home in 2003. But the revelation wasn't here yet. Not in 2003. Not in 2010. Not even in 2021. It was coming, though, slowly, inevitably, like a long-buried tide rising from beneath the Florida soil. And when it arrived, when the suspect's face was finally unmasked, the community would learn that the truth had been standing far closer than anyone dared to imagine. The cold case unit didn't know it yet. But the moment they reopened the evidence box in 2021, the entire investigation began to pulse with a strange kind of electricity, an invisible shift, like the air tightening before a storm. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. They were stirring something that had been sleeping, something that had grown comfortable in the dark. But as they laid the items on the table one by one, as the fabric scrap unfolded beneath the harsh white lights of the forensic lab, something unsettling began to creep into the room, a feeling that the past wasn't just being revisited, it was beginning to resist. Detectives reviewed the original forensic notes again. The scrap had been collected from the playground's tree line mere hours after the 2003 disappearance. Its fibers were synthetic, common, unremarkable. No blood, no visible residue. In 2003, it had been a dead end. But in 2021, with next-generation sequencing capable of extracting trace DNA invisible to the human eye, suddenly this scrap was no longer a forgettable object. It was a sealed vault. And inside it lay the breath of someone who had stood at that tree, someone the storm hadn't washed away. The forensic analyst examined it under magnification first. Loose fibers. Torn edge. Dirt embedded deep into the weave. Nothing unusual, until she noticed something subtle, something easy to miss, a faint darkening along one corner. Not a stain. A smudge. As if someone had handled it with fingers wet from rain, sweat, or something else entirely. She photographed it meticulously. She prepared the sample. And as it sat inside the extraction machine humming quietly, she felt a strange chill, as if she were disturbing a grave. The detectives waited outside the lab, pacing the hallway like men guarding a door they feared might open too fast. They talked about possibilities, suspects, theories, but their voices sounded hollow even to themselves. 20 years had built a barrier between the truth and their reach, a barrier made not just of time but of fear. Because what if the truth didn't lead to closure? What if it only led to more questions? Across town, the mother sat by the window of her now smaller home, watching rain streak down the glass like the storm was rehearsing its lines. Every so often she held her daughter's old necklace, a small silver charm shaped like a wave, closing her eyes as memories washed over her. She didn't know tests were underway. She didn't know answers were approaching. But she felt something stirring deep inside her, a pressure behind her ribs that felt like the thin line between hope and dread. Meanwhile, the analyst returned to the lab machine. The screen flickered before stabilizing into a sequence she hadn't expected. Not a full profile, not even close. But enough. Enough to excite her. Enough to scare her. Enough to whisper that someone else had been at the playground that night, someone who shouldn't have been. She ran the sequence again. Same partial result. She cleaned the equipment, repeated the extraction. Again, the same pattern. This wasn't contamination. This wasn't coincidence. This was a fingerprint left not by touch but by presence. Something microscopic. Something living. When she brought the data to the detectives, they stared at the screen with the reverent fear of men seeing a ghost materialize. The partial DNA was male. It didn't match the family. It didn't match any first responders. It didn't match anyone in the household. It didn't match any registered offenders tested at the time. And it didn't match any of the sample suspects from the early investigation. This was someone new. Someone unaccounted for. Someone who had slipped through every net. They entered the sequence into the National DNA Database. Days passed with no hit. Not surprising. Partial samples rarely match outright. But the cold case team didn't rely on luck, they relied on advancement. Genetic genealogy had cracked cases once thought impossible. Now, they turned to it with the feverish hope of men holding a key without yet knowing which door it opened. Over the next weeks, analysts traced biological breadcrumbs, third cousins, distant matches, clusters of names forming an extended tree. It began wide. It began faint. But slowly, branches narrowed. Pathways connected. A lineage emerged. And from that lineage, a pattern surfaced, several relatives living in Florida during the early 2000s. The map on the wall began to bloom with pins. Clearwater. Largo. Dunedin. All within driving distance of the playground. All within range of someone who might have passed through unnoticed. But one name kept resurfacing. One branch of the tree pointed consistently toward a man who had lived only one neighborhood away from the victim in 2003. His address was recorded in public records. He had moved shortly after the disappearance. not suspicious on its own. People move all the time. But detectives felt it, the prickle, the shift, the quiet alarm ringing beneath the surface. They ran his name through old traffic citations. He had been stopped once in 2002 for speeding, driving a red truck. Detectives fell silent. The storm binder had never contained his name. He was never questioned, never interviewed, never considered. He wasn't a teacher, not a neighbor the family knew, not a registered offender. Nothing connected him directly, except the truck, the genealogy hit, and proximity. But sometimes cases don't hinge on what's obverse. They hinge on what's been hiding. As detectives dug into his past, they found employment records showing he had worked night shifts in 2003, often alone, often driving between job sites. His job required anonymity. His co-workers described him as quiet, withdrawn, difficult to read. A man who avoided eye contact. A man who rarely spoke of his personal life. A man who blended into the background so effortlessly people struggled to recall anything specific about him. The detectives tracked down his former landlord. She remembered him only vaguely, paid on time, kept to himself, moved out suddenly. Left the room spotless. Except for one thing she had found while cleaning, a torn piece of synthetic fabric stuck under a dresser drawer. She threw it away. She dismissed it. But her description lingered uncomfortably close to the scrap recovered at the playground. The cold case unit could feel the noose tightening. But they weren't ready to move. Not yet. They needed confirmation. They needed his DNA. They obtained a warrant for a covert collection. Surveillance units watched him for days, outside his apartment, near the grocery store, behind an auto shop where he now worked. They watched him smoke alone on his break, flicking ashes into the wind. They waited for a discarded cup, a cigarette filter, anything. Then it happened. He tossed a half-drunk water bottle into a public trash bin. Detectives retrieved it within minutes. The sample went to the lab. The weight was agonizing. The analysts worked through the night. Machines hummed. Data assembled. Patterns aligned. And when the final comparison appeared on the screen, a cold, heavy silence filled the room. It was him. The male DNA on the fabric scrap matched the discarded bottle. Statistically undeniable. Legally sufficient. Scientifically conclusive. After 20 years, the ghost had a name, a face, a body walking freely under the Florida sun. The investigators sat in stunned disbelief, not because they doubted the evidence, but because of how close this man had lived to the case all along, close enough to hear the sirens, close enough to see the posters, close enough to watch candlelight vigils flicker on winter nights. They reviewed his timeline. On the night of the disappearance, he had clocked out early due to the incoming storm. His job site was less than a mile from the school. His truck route passed directly by the choir building. The pieces slipped into place with terrifying ease. He had opportunity. He had proximity. And now, thanks to the genealogy match, he had the DNA connection that bridged 2003 to the present like a thread running straight through time. The detectives didn't celebrate. They felt no triumph. Only dread. Because the next step wasn't arrest, it was confrontation. And men who hide for 20 years don't respond predictably when cornered. They briefed the mother. Her reaction was a breath drawn so sharply it sounded like something inside her cracked. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She sat perfectly still as the words washed over her, the truth landing like a blow she had both begged for and feared. The next morning, detectives gathered at dawn outside the suspect's small apartment complex. The Florida sky was pale blue, deceptively calm, the kind of morning that feels too gentle for what it's about to witness. Officers moved into position. Radios whispered. Doors clicked. Hearts pounded. When the suspect stepped outside, carrying a lunch bag and keys to a truck that, though newer, still bore a faint red shimmer in the sunlight, he froze at the sight of the officers. His eyes didn't widen. His jaw didn't tense. Instead, he lowered his head slowly, like a man who had been waiting for this moment to arrive. They arrested him without resistance. But the most chilling detail wasn't his silence, or his expression, or the way he surrendered as though he had rehearsed it. It was the words he finally spoke in the patrol car, barely audible, almost swallowed by the hum of the engine. "You're 20 years late." And just like that, the cold case was no longer a mystery shrouded in storm. It was a monster stepping into the light. The words hung in the patrol car like a tocsin. "You're 20 years late." Not shouted, not taunting, just stated, flat, almost resigned, as if he were confirming something that had been true long before the cold case unit ever reopened their evidence box. The officers exchanged glances, unsettled by the tone. Men who confess rarely sound calm. Men who deny rarely sound this sure. But he wasn't confessing. He wasn't denying. He was acknowledging something. A truth only he knew. A truth that had survived storms, investigations, rumors, and silence. At headquarters, he sat in an interview room illuminated by a single overhead light, the kind that casts long shadows under the eyes and turns every movement into a study of guilt. He rested his hands on the metal table, fingers interlaced, motionless. The detectives watched him from behind the one-way glass. This was the face they had been hunting through decades of paperwork, grainy footage, and fading memories. This was the man whose DNA had clung to a scrap of fabric through rain, wind, and time. This was the storm's shadow made flesh. But the most unnerving thing was how ordinary he looked. A quiet man. Average build. A slight stoop in his posture. A man who could slip into crowds unnoticed, walk into stores without turning heads, stand at bus stops without drawing a single glance. His blandness was his camouflage. His forgettable presence was his weapon. The investigators had expected a monster. Instead, they got a void, a face that offered nothing. Detective Ramirez entered the room first. He had handled enough interviews to know silence can be louder than questions. He placed a file on the table, not the storm binder, but a thin folder containing only the essentials. The suspect didn't look at it. He didn't look at Ramirez. He stared straight ahead at the blank wall as though reading words no one else could see. Ramirez began. "You know why you're here." The suspect blinked slowly. "I figured it out." "You know this is about the girl." A pause. A breath. But no reaction. Ramirez leaned forward. "Her DNA was on that scrap. Your DNA was on that scrap. They were found in the same place. Same time. Same night." The suspect's jaw moved slightly, a tiny shift like his teeth pressed together for a moment. "Nothing more. You want to explain that?" Another silence. Deep. Weighted. Almost deliberate. Finally, the suspect spoke, not answering the question but cutting through the air like a blade. "You don't have the whole story." Ramirez stared at him, completely still. "Then tell it." But the man didn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked for a glass of water. When the officer returned and placed it in front of him, he didn't drink, only dipped a finger into the water and let droplets fall onto the table. Watching them spread. watching them disappear. It was impossible not to think of raindrops sliding off a storm coat, off a child's backpack, off a man's hands 2 decades ago. Outside, the cold case team regrouped. They reviewed the timeline, the match results, the statements from neighbors, the data from the genealogical tree. Everything pointed to him. Everything pulled tight around his name. But the detectives felt a growing dread, a sense that the story behind this man was more complicated, more tangled, more dangerous than they anticipated. They had captured him. But they hadn't cornered the truth. Back in the room, Ramirez switched tactics. Your family lineage matches the sample. You lived near the school. You drove a red truck. You left Florida days after the disappearance. You moved often. You kept to yourself. Everything about you aligns with this case. The suspect tilted his head slightly, the smallest hint of curiosity. Is that what you think? That proximity is guilt? You were there. That night, the suspect murmured, eyes unfocused, and many people were there. But only one left DNA where she vanished. He inhaled slowly, as if bracing himself against some invisible pressure. You don't know what you've opened. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. We opened the truth. The suspect leaned forward just enough for the chain on his wrist restraints to clink softly. No. You opened the storm. It was an odd statement, cryptic, unsettling, almost theatrical. Ramirez refused to be thrown. What does that mean? The suspect didn't elaborate. Not immediately. Instead, he looked at the mirror, the one-way glass, directly into the faces of the detectives watching behind it, even though he couldn't see them. You think the storm hides things. But it reveals them too. Behind the glass, Detective Sloan stiffened. He had been one of the tech experts who reconstructed the storm path from 2003. He knew the weather pattern by heart. The suspect's phrasing wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate. And it made his skin crawl. Ramirez placed a photograph on the table, the last known image of the girl. Smiling. Bright eyes. Choir shirt. Frozen in a moment that should have led to dozens more years. The suspect stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. Not cold. Not detached. Something else, something like recognition, but not of the girl. Of the moment. Of the night. As if he were watching a memory play out behind his eyes. Ramirez asked softly, did you take her? The suspect didn't answer. Did you hurt her? Another silence. Where is she? Silence again. But this silence felt different. Not defiant. Not frightened. More like he was listening to something Ramirez couldn't hear. Finally he said, it wasn't supposed to happen that way. Ramirez's pulse hammered. What wasn't supposed to happen? The suspect closed his eyes. A muscle in his cheek twitched. She wasn't alone. Ramirez looked sharply at the glass, at his team, at the file. Nothing in the case had ever suggested someone else was with her. Not until that moment. Who? Ramirez demanded. But the suspect stayed silent, as if he had already said too much. Detectives behind the glass erupted into controlled chaos. Names of forgotten classmates, ex-neighbors, distant relatives flew between them. Who else had been in her path that night? Who else had vanished from records unexpectedly? Who else had driven through the storm? The suspect watched the panic ripple through the air, even though he couldn't see it. He could feel it. He smiled, Barely, a tiny, unsettling curve of the lips. You're still late. Ramirez slammed a stack of documents onto the table. You think cryptic answers are going to help you? You're facing a life sentence. You need to talk. The suspect whispered, the storm took more than one. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ramirez asked, you're saying someone else was there with her? Someone you know? Someone alive? The suspect only stared, unreadable. The cold case team dug into records with renewed desperation. They searched for additional missing persons reports that night. They combed through documents for connections they might have overlooked. Nothing stood out. Nothing pointed to another child gone, another witness missing, another thread ignored. Unless the other person wasn't another victim. Unless the other person was an accomplice. Outside, the evening sky darkened over Clearwater, clouds gathering as though drawn to the precinct by some grim magnet. Rain began to spatter against windows, soft at first, then harder still, until the sound echoed through the building like an old memory returning. Inside the interview room, the suspect lifted his face toward the ceiling as thunder rolled in the distance. There, he murmured. It starts again. Ramirez felt a chill crawl up his spine. What starts again? But before the suspect could answer, before the detectives could push deeper, before the truth could surface, a knock came at the door. The lab technician stepped in, pale, breathless, holding a sheet of paper with trembling fingers. Detective, she said, voice thin, we found something else. The suspect's smile faded instantly. Ramirez snatched the paper. His eyes widened. Behind the glass, the team pressed forward, trying to read his expression. On the paper was a single line of text. A second DNA profile. Found on the same scrap. Not matching the girl. Not matching the suspect. A profile that belonged to no one on record. A profile that had been there the whole time, missed, ignored, overlooked beneath the degraded layers of fabric until modern sequencing stripped them away. And in the quiet that followed, the suspect whispered with chilling certainty. That's the one you should be afraid of. The storm outside roared. And inside the precinct, every cold case detective understood something terrible. They had unmasked the wrong man first. The moment the second DNA profile appeared on the lab report, a crack shot through the investigation like lightning splitting an old tree down the center. The suspect, silent, cryptic, unreadable, sat in the interview room with the faintest tightening around his eyes, as though the revelation had pierced whatever mask he'd been wearing. But he didn't look afraid. He looked relieved. As if the truth he'd been carrying alone for 20 years had finally shifted its weight onto someone else. Detective Ramirez felt his pulse hammering as he read the results again, the numbers blurring together. A second profile. Male. Unknown. No match in national databases. No match in state logs. No familial hints. It was a ghost, cold, clean, untouched by time, immune to every search the system had ever run. A presence at the playground the night the girl vanished. A presence the storm had buried so deeply no one even knew to look. Ramirez stormed back into the interview room. The suspect didn't lift his head. He merely spoke before Ramirez could open his mouth. Now you see it. Ramirez slammed the report onto the table, the pages sliding across the metal surface. Who is he? The suspect looked at the pages as though watching an old movie play out. The storm wasn't empty. Ramirez leaned in, fury simmering. You said she wasn't alone. You said something wasn't supposed to happen. Now there's another male profile on the fabric. You're going to start talking, or... The suspect raised a hand, a small motion shackled by cuffs. You're chasing me because I'm easy. Because my face fits the shape of your 20-year-old fear. But you found what you were supposed to find. Ramirez's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. And what exactly were we supposed to find? The other one, he murmured. The one the storm covered. Before Ramirez could react, a crash of thunder rolled so violently through the building that the lights flickered. The storm outside had intensified, as if trying to claw its way into the precinct. Rain hammered the windows, flooding the hallway with a relentless drumbeat that made every officer tense. The coincidence felt unnatural. The timing felt surgical. Behind the glass, Detective Sloan muttered, "It's like the storm is retracing itself." No one laughed. No one dismissed it. It felt true. Ramirez spread the crime scene photographs across the table. You were at the playground. Your DNA proves that. Yes, the suspect said calmly. You were involved. Yes. Then tell us what you did, Ramirez snapped. The suspect's voice softened oddly. You don't ask what I did. You should ask what I stopped. The detectives exchanged bewildered looks. Ramirez slammed his hand on the table. No more riddles. Thunder cracked again. The suspect's eyes rose to meet Ramirez's for the first time, and in that moment, there was no defiance, no bravado, only a strange, bleak honesty. I wasn't hunting her. The silence that followed was suffocating. I followed the truck, he continued. I saw the headlights near the school. I saw her walking alone. I saw him first. Ramirez froze. Him. The one you can't find, the suspect whispered. The one the storm swallowed. Detectives behind the glass leaned forward, the room thick with dread. I tried to stop him, the suspect said. But you don't understand. He moved like he already knew the storm was coming. Like he'd been waiting for the cover it would give him. And when the wind picked up, when the lights went out along the road, when the sirens drowned everything else, he vanished with her into the rain. Ramirez felt a chill creep up his spine. Why didn't you report it? The suspect's jaw tightened. Because no one believes a man who chases a stranger's truck in the dark. No one believes a man who can't give a name or a license plate. No one believes a man who tries to intervene too late. Sloan murmured behind the glass, as describing someone who knew the storm forecast someone who planned around it. Ramirez pressed, then why did your DNA show up on the fabric? The suspect's voice trembled, not with fear, but with memory. I grabbed him. At the tree line. I tried to pull him back. I got a piece of his jacket. He tore away. Ran into the downpour with her. The suspect looked at the raindrops sliding down the window pane as if watching that night replay. The fabric you found wasn't hers. And it wasn't mine. Ramirez stared at him, breath caught. It was his. For a moment, everything went still. Then the implication slammed into the room like another burst of thunder. The second DNA profile wasn't an accomplice. It wasn't contamination. It wasn't coincidence. It was him, the man the suspect had tried to stop. The ghost of the storm. The shadow no one had even known to look for. Back in the bullpen, officers scrambled to cross-check old statements, revisit archived weather data, scan for missing vehicle reports that matched the vague description. Analysts rushed to reprocess the degraded photos from 2003 using modern enhancement software. Digital technicians tried reconstructing truck shapes from distorted reflections left on waterlogged security footage. Every inch of evidence was suddenly alive again, breathing, pulsing. But the suspect was not finished. He knew the neighborhoods, he said quietly. He didn't choose her at random. He'd studied her route. He knew the storm would drown out the sound. He knew the downed lines would kill the power on those blocks. He knew which streetlights always flickered before heavy rain. Ramirez whispered, How do you know that? Because I watched him do the same thing to someone else. Every detective froze. What do you mean? Ramirez asked. The suspect's eyes darkened, sinking into shadows of memory. Years before. Different town. Same pattern. Storm rolls in. Power dips. A child walking home. A truck that shouldn't be there. Ramirez's throat tightened. Did you report it then? No, the suspect looked sick. I didn't understand what I had seen. Not until Clearwater. The team erupted into frantic discussion behind the glass. If the second DNA profile truly belonged to another predator operating under the cover of storms, then the 2003 case wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a pattern hidden by time and weather. Ramirez pressed harder, voice low and urgent. You're telling us there's another offender out there. Someone who's been doing this for years. The suspect nodded slowly. And you didn't catch him then. You didn't catch him now. You caught the man who tried to stop him. Ramirez leaned back, stunned. Why didn't you come forward before? The suspect's eyes held a kind of grief that didn't fit his face. Because I failed. And because when I chased him in Clearwater, he saw me. He saw my truck. He remembered me. A cold dread washed over the room. He targeted you? No, the suspect whispered. He avoided me. Clever men avoid threats. They let the shadows take the blame. Ramirez stared at him, realization sinking in. You think he planted something at the scene? No. He didn't need to. The suspect met Ramirez's eyes. I left DNA when I tried to stop him. That was enough to damn me. Every detective behind the glass felt a sinking weight. The suspect wasn't confessing. He wasn't deflecting guilt. He wasn't playing games. He was describing a predator more calculated, more patient, more invisible than any of them had imagined. A predator the storm had given cover to for years. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the interview room in a blinding white glare. When it faded, the suspect whispered the words that tightened every throat watching. He's still out there. And if the storms are coming back, so is he. Ramirez clenched his fists. We need a name. You won't get one, the suspect murmured. He doesn't leave names. Then how do we find him? The suspect exhaled a breath that trembled at the edges. You won't find him in records. Or in reports. Or in databases. Then where? The suspect lifted his head as thunder roared above them. You'll find him in the storms. Because that's where he waits. The storm pressed against the precinct walls as if trying to seep through the cracks, rattling window panes, humming through vents, rolling across the roof with the heavy insistence of something alive. Inside, officers moved with a new urgency, one that came not from evidence, not from orders, but from instinct. The suspect's words had altered the air, reshaped the narrative, shifted the center of gravity of the entire case. For 20 years, they had hunted one ghost. Now they understood there had always been two. And the one still out there, the one untouched by suspicion, unmarked by databases, unmentioned in any report, was the one whose shadow stretched across every unanswered question. Detective Ramirez re-entered the interview room with a stiffness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He knew the suspect wasn't lying. The man's cadence, his detail, the tremor buried beneath his voice, none of it matched the patterns of deception Ramirez had learned to recognize over decades. This wasn't a man unraveling under pressure. This was a man finally releasing a truth he had carried alone, a truth he never believed anyone would believe. And now, faced with a second DNA profile that validated every word he'd spoken, Ramirez no longer doubted him. But belief wasn't enough. Belief didn't find predators. Belief didn't close cold cases. Belief didn't unmask a ghost. "You're going to tell me everything," Ramirez said, sitting down slowly. His voice no longer held anger. It held something sharper. Start at the beginning. Not Clearwater. The first time. The suspect lowered his gaze, fingers intertwined, the chain on his cuffs whispering against the table. "It was another storm," he said softly. "Different town. Long before your case. A night just like this." Behind the glass, detectives leaned in. It was late. Roads were empty. The power flickered. "I saw a child walking alone. A boy. Maybe 8. Maybe 9. He was carrying a school project, something made of cardboard. The rain ruined it as he walked." His voice shook. "Just once. I saw the truck behind him. The same movement. The same crawl. The same patience." He swallowed hard. "I thought it was just a parent. Or a neighbor. But then the headlights cut out. And the truck drifted closer. Too close." Ramirez asked quietly, "Did you see the driver?" "No. I only saw the outline." He sat very still. The suspect's fingers tightened. Stillness can be more frightening than movement. It means someone is waiting. The detectives behind the glass exchanged looks. They understood. Predators stalk in silence. They study patterns. They prepare. Ramirez pressed gently. What happened next?" The boy disappeared into the rain. Gone. Swallowed. Just like she was. His voice frayed at the edges. "I followed the truck. Tried to get close. But the storm cut visibility. And when the lightning flashed, it was already gone." "You reported it?" "No. Because there was no evidence of a crime. No missing child reported the next day. No police cars. No flyers. Nothing." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I know what I saw. I know what he did. I just didn't understand how he hid it." Ramirez leaned back, the pieces shifting inside his mind. If the predator had taken victims from multiple counties, avoiding detection each time, then he was more than opportunistic. He was meticulous. Calculated. He struck during storms because storms erased everything. GPS logs, eyewitness visibility, sound, scent trails, power lines, camera feeds. A perfect hunting ground, clean and untraceable. Ramirez asked, "Why did he target her?" The suspect closed his eyes. Rain pounded the glass like fists. Because she walked home alone the same way the boy did. Same vulnerability. Same pattern. He waits for children who follow predictable paths. And you recognize the pattern. Yes. A pause. Too late. Ramirez spread the storm reconstruction maps across the table. We need details. Anything you remember about the truck. The shape. The sound. The way he drove. The suspect breathed out slowly. It was older. Heavy engine. The kind that growls under strain. A faint rattle from the chassis. And the driver, he never made mistakes. Never sped. Never braked too hard. Never panicked. Ramirez scribbled notes. Behind the glass, Sloan ran to pull old mechanical databases, cross-referencing storm dates with vehicle registrations, focusing on older models with known chassis defects. And the driver? Ramirez pressed. Anything at all? The suspect hesitated. One thing. Ramirez leaned forward. What? He never looked shocked. Ramirez frowned. Explain. When I confronted him at the tree line, when I grabbed him, he didn't run like someone who'd been caught. The suspect's eyes went distant. He moved like someone who had expected this. As if he'd planned for the possibility of being interrupted, of someone trying to stop him. He tore away too quickly. Too cleanly. Almost practiced. Ramirez felt cold settle into his bones. A predator who rehearsed escapes. Who anticipated interference. Who studied routes, storm warnings, neighborhood layouts. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't chaotic. This was engineered. Then the suspect added, voice barely audible, he wasn't afraid of being seen. He was afraid of being recognized. A chill rippled through the observation room. Recognized meant known. Known meant local. Local meant someone who had lived near the girl, near the boy, near every storm-struck neighborhood that had quietly swallowed a child. Ramirez forced himself to stay steady. Why do you think he targeted kids specifically? The suspect shook his head. Because they believe people are good. Because they walk toward headlights instead of away from them. The room fell silent. Outside, thunder boomed again, closer now, louder, shaking the glass. A voice called from the hallway. Sloan rushed in, breathless, clutching a folder thick with freshly printed records. We found something, he said, eyes blazing with adrenaline. A cluster of storm night incidents from nearby counties. Kids reported as late getting home, briefly missing, lost during the storm but returned. Nothing formally logged as abductions, but when you map them, he flipped open the folder, revealing a pattern that made the air leave the room. 5 incidents. 5 storms. 5 children who vanished momentarily only to reappear shaken, confused, unable to describe what had happened. The suspect exhaled sharply, as if the air had been punched from his lungs. He tested them, he whispered. He practiced. Ramirez stared at the pattern. Why didn't any of this show up in the original investigation? Sloan answered grimly, because none of them were coded as crimes. They were treated as kids getting lost in bad weather. But look, he pointed to the timestamps. Every one of these happened within a 1-hour window of the storm peak. And every one happened near roads with failing power lines. The storm outside roared in agreement. Ramirez felt the truth settling like a crushing weight. He's been doing this for years. Using storms as camouflage. The suspect nodded, eyes hollow. And he's gotten better. Ramirez turned back to him. Why did he leave nothing behind? No trace? No mistakes? He doesn't need to leave anything, the suspect whispered. The storm erases it all. Sloan added, voice tight, the only reason we found his DNA this time was because you contaminated the scrap when you grabbed him. The suspect looked at his own hands as though seeing them for the first time. I left the mistake. Not him. Lightning lit the room again. Ramirez asked, why did he stop after Clearwater? The suspect raised his head, face pale. He didn't stop. The detectives froze. He just moved to storms you weren't watching. Places that don't keep records. Counties that don't connect cases across borders. He adapts. He waits. He watches weather patterns. Sloan said, if he's still active, we need to predict his next storm zone. But before Ramirez could respond, the suspect whispered, you won't find him by waiting for the next storm. Ramirez narrowed his eyes. Then how? The suspect leaned forward, shackles scraping softly. You find him by going back to the one place he never expected anyone to look. Ramirez frowned. Where? The suspect's voice was barely a breath. Her school. The detectives stared. The suspect continued. He watched her. He learned her schedule. He knew which days she stayed late. He didn't pick her at random. He didn't hunt her by chance. Ramirez whispered, he stalked her. He stalks all of them, the suspect said. Long before the storm. The storm is only the curtain. The performance begins much earlier. Ramirez stiffened. Then there will be records. Footage. Witnesses. The suspect shook his head slowly. You're still thinking like he leaves footprints. Ramirez demanded, then what does he leave? The suspect stared straight into the glass, as if speaking to the detectives behind it. He leaves patterns. Lightning struck so close the room flashed white. Sloane's radio crackled violently, an officer's voice shouting through static. Detectives, you're gonna want to see this. We pulled archived maintenance logs from the school, maintenance badge access, 20 years back. Static swallowed the rest. Ramirez snatched the radio. Say again. Through the crackling storm interference, one phrase cut through clearly. There was a maintenance worker on her route. One who shouldn't have been there. The suspect closed his eyes. That's him, he whispered. And outside, the storm screamed against the windows. The radio crackled again, barely audible under the pounding of the storm, each burst of static snapping through the hallway like electric whiplash. Ramirez held it tight in his hand, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the interview room window as if the suspect inside might suddenly evaporate now that a new lead had surfaced. Behind the glass, Sloan was already motioning for tech officers to pull up archived school access logs from 2 decades ago. The storm outside screamed, rattling the vents, shaking the old light fixtures that buzzed overhead with a flicker that felt too familiar, too much like 2003. Inside the room, the suspect's expression didn't change. If anything, the faint, haunted calm in his eyes deepened. You found him, didn't you? He whispered. Ramirez didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't yet know. Not for certain. But something in the suspect's voice, something steady, resigned, almost relieved, suggested the truth was finally breaking through the surface of a 20-year storm. The door burst open. Sloane rushed in, breath ragged, holding a stack of printed logs that looked like they'd been stapled together by someone in a hurry, some pages crooked, edges torn. "You need to see this," he said, laying the stack in front of Ramirez. Ramirez scanned the first page. Then the second. Then the third. His heart began to thud harder with every line he read. Access logs. Maintenance badges. Recorded entries and exits at Westfield Middle School for September 14, 2003, the day the girl disappeared. There, among the list of routine badge entries, nothing unusual jumped out at first. A janitor clocking in early. A custodian updating the vac filters. A district electrician checking lighting panels before the storm. Then, 2 entries marked with the same badge number. Back to back. Less than 5 minutes apart. Badge ID 0043M. Name assigned, Wyatt Cullen. Role, contract maintenance. Status, temp, not permanent staff. The problem wasn't the double entry. It was the timestamp. 7:06 p.m., badge IN. 7:11 p.m., badge out. The girl had been last seen at 7:05 p.m. leaving campus. And no one, not a single staff member, teacher, or administrator, remembered a man named Wyatt Cullen. Ramirez's voice dropped to a whisper. Was he even real? Sloane opened another file. That's the thing. He doesn't appear in the district's payroll. Not in HR. Not on contractor lists. Not on vendor rosters. Badge 0043M should have been deactivated years earlier. But someone reactivated it manually. The suspect lowered his gaze, a tremor sliding through his shoulders. He was there, he murmured. I told you. Ramirez flipped deeper into the logs. Other dates circled in red appeared, days the girl stayed late for choir practice. Badge 0043M appeared on all of them. Watching. Tracking. Learning her routine. A predator mapping a child's life like a schedule. Ramirez felt sick. Sloane continued, there's more. We cross-checked the badge ID with door access patterns. Cullen's badge was used only to enter the east maintenance stairwell, the one facing the choir building. The door closest to where the girl was last seen. The suspect looked at the floor. He always chooses the doors no one watches. Ramirez snapped his head toward him. You knew this? I didn't know his name, the suspect said softly. But I recognized the method. He goes where the cameras don't. Sloane held up another page. We found a work order logged under his name too. Submitted the day before the disappearance. For light fixture inspection in the choir wing. That work order was never approved, as Sloane added, voice trembling. Someone forged the signature. Thunder hammered the roof. Ramirez muttered, he used the school to scout her. The suspect whispered, he uses buildings like blindfolds. Walks through them invisibly. People see a maintenance badge, a uniform. They don't question what he's doing. A profound dread settled over the room. The suspect continued, voice cracking, he studied her. He waited for a storm strong enough to erase everything he planned. Ramirez felt rage ignite in his chest, not at the suspect, but at the ghost they had never known existed. How did we miss this? He hissed. Sloane swallowed hard. Because the original logs were corrupted by storm outages. Half the records came in as fragmented entries. The badge logs were filed separately. They weren't cross-checked. Ramirez whispered. He hid in the paperwork. Another burst of lightning illuminated the room like a camera flash. The suspect flinched, not at the noise, but at the memory it dragged behind it. Ramirez leaned forward. Tell me what you saw that night. All of it. No more riddles. The suspect's hands tightened around the steel table. I saw her leaving the building. I saw his truck idling near the corner, lights off. I saw him step out, pretending to adjust something in the back. He waited until she passed. Then he followed. Why didn't you stop him then? Ramirez pushed. Because there were others around. Cars, students, teachers. I thought he'd back off. Predators don't strike when there are too many eyes. His voice grew hollow. But the storm came faster than anyone expected. When the power flickered out, the last pair of eyes disappeared. He paused. A shudder passed through him. I chased him, he said. All the way to the tree line. I grabbed his sleeve. He was stronger than he looked. And he moved like someone who had done this before. He tore away. Ran into the dark. And then he inhaled sharply, reliving it. The storm swallowed everything. For a moment, the room was silent except for the angry breath of the storm outside. Sloan said, We need to reopen every maintenance record from that month. Every contractor badge. Every building entry log. Ramirez nodded. If he used the school once, he may have used others. Sloan added, We should alert surrounding counties. Look for storms. Dates. Children who were reported briefly missing but returned. The suspect looked up. You won't catch him through official channels. Ramirez glared at him. Why not? He doesn't exist on paper. He makes himself real only long enough to blend in. A uniform for one day. A badge for one evening. A truck with plates he removes before storms. Then he disappears. Sloan whispered, "A chameleon." The suspect shook his head. Not a chameleon. A storm crow. He only lands where the sky breaks open. A chill rippled through every detective. He'll come back, the suspect murmured. He always does. Ramirez asked, why? The suspect's eyes filled with something that looked like despair. Because he thinks the storm protects him. And does it? Ramirez asked. It did, the suspect said quietly. Until now. Sloane's radio crackled again, a voice strained under pressure. Detectives, this is urgent. We pulled archived sign-in sheets from the east stairwell. There's handwriting matching the fake work order signature. Ramirez felt adrenaline spike. And it matches maintenance logs from another school. 3 towns over. Same year. Same storm season. The suspect closed his eyes. You're getting close, he whispered. Ramirez leaned over the table. Give us more. Anything. We need something to identify him. The suspect hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then, he had a scar. Ramirez froze. Where? Behind his right ear, the suspect whispered. Thin. Curved. Like a hook. A murmur spread behind the glass. Anything else? Ramirez pressed. A smell, the suspect said. chemical, like old varnish, or adhesive remover. Sloane scribbled furiously. And one more thing, either suspect added. He hummed. Ramirez blinked. Hummed what? A melody. Low. Off key. The same 3 notes. Over and over. Even in the storm, I heard them. Ramirez stared at him. Why didn't you say that before? Because I didn't remember until now, the suspect whispered. The storm was loud. And I was terrified. But when I grabbed him, my hand on his sleeve, I felt the vibration in his arm. He hummed while he ran. A silence fell so thick it seemed to stop the air. Ramirez pushed back from the table. We need audio analysts, music teachers, anyone who might recognize. The precinct lights flickered violently, then went out. Everything plunged into darkness. The storm roared. A generator kicked on, but too slowly. For 5 long seconds, the building was blind. When the lights sputtered back to life, the detectives rushed to confirm the suspect was still secured. He was. But his face had changed. He was staring at the ceiling with a terror so raw it stopped Ramirez cold. What is it? Ramirez demanded. The suspect whispered, voice shaking. He's here. Thunder cracked like gunfire. And he's watching you. The emergency lights washed the precinct in a ghastly red glow, pulsing against the walls like a mechanical heartbeat. Officers froze where they stood, radios hissing with broken static, monitors rebooting one by one in a staggered flicker that only amplified the sense of something unseen moving just beyond the edges of perception. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling like an animal clawing at the building. But the suspect, shackled, cornered, seemingly harmless minutes earlier, was trembling now, breath stuttering like each inhale was scraping against shattered memories. Ramirez stepped toward him cautiously. What do you mean, he's here? The suspect's eyes darted toward the far wall, pupils dilated, skin drained of all color. He follows storms, he whispered. He moves with them. He hides inside them. When the lights go out, that's when he looks for new places to disappear into. Sloane burst through the door holding a tablet, screen glitching from the temporary blackout. The exterior cameras cut out for 4 minutes, he said, wiping water from his face. They're back now, but the feed is scrambled. Ramirez frowned. Was the outage weather-related? Sloane hesitated. Maybe. But the lightning strike was miles from here. And only the precinct lost power. The suspect flinched. He sabotages. He always sabotages. Ramirez shot him a hard look. You said he wouldn't expose himself. He wouldn't, the suspect whispered. Unless he thinks someone might identify him. A chill ran through the room as Sloane replayed the last few minutes of exterior footage. Most of it was distorted lines of static, but then, for one half-blurred frame, a shape appeared beside the south entrance. A silhouette. Tall. Still. The figure stood at an angle where the security lights should have shown a face, but the power outage caught the exact second he passed. Ramirez leaned in so close his breath fogged the screen. Zoom. Sloane did. The figure remained faceless, the camera too corrupted to reveal even a blur of features. But the outline of the head was visible, hair trimmed close, neck rigid, shoulders squared. And behind the right ear, in the flash of a returning light, for less than a second. A thin, curved line. A scar. Ramirez's heartbeat slammed into his ribs. That's him, the suspect whispered, sinking deeper into his chair as if trying to merge with the shadow behind him. I told you. He watches the people who chase him. He watches to see if he needs to disappear again. Ramirez felt his grip tighten around the edge of the table. He wouldn't come to a police station. That'd be suicide. The suspect shook his head, eyes wide. He came to see if you know his name. Sloane swallowed hard. Or if any of us have seen his face. Behind the glass, officers scrambled to secure all exits. Radios barked orders. It checked the perimeter. Sweep the south alley. No one enters or leaves. But the storm swallowed their shouts, muffling them beneath a roar that made the hallways vibrate. Ramirez turned back to the suspect. Give us everything. Everything you remember about him. We need something we can use. The suspect's breaths came faster now, panic edging into his voice. He's careful. He never lets people see him twice. He never leaves prints. He never speaks. You said he hummed. That wasn't humming. The suspect shuddered. It was like a habit. A rhythm. Like he was sinking himself to the storm. Ramirez tried to steady his voice. Does he know who you are? Yes. Does he know where to find you? Yes. Would he come here to silence you? The suspect's gaze snapped up, terrified. He's not here to silence me. Then why is he watching us? Ramirez demanded. The suspect whispered, "It to see who else remembers." Before Ramirez could push further, another officer rushed in, breathless. Detectives, someone just left something on the hood of your car. Ramirez stiffened. What is it? The officer held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a torn rectangle of laminated material. A maintenance badge. 0043M. Wyatt Cullen. Temp access. Expires. None. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the badge itself. It was the smear across the surface. A smear the color of wet soil. Ramirez's voice was almost inaudible. Where was this found? Front parking lot, the officer said. Sitting dead center on your windshield. Like someone wanted you to see it. Sloane cursed under his breath. He's taunting us. No, the suspect whispered. He's warning you. Ramirez snapped his head toward him. About what? The suspect swallowed hard. That he can go anywhere. Do anything. Walk into any building and pretend he belongs there. Even a police station. The room went silent. Then Sloane's radio crackled again, but this time, the voice coming through wasn't frantic. It was calm. Too calm. A low, steady humming drifted through the static, 3 notes, looping over and over. Off-key. Uneven. A haunting little pattern that didn't belong anywhere except the darkest corners of memory. The suspect recoiled as if struck. Ramirez grabbed the radio. Dispatch. Identify the transmission source. But the humming continued, unbroken. 3 notes. Again. And again. Until every hair on Ramirez's arms stood straight. Finally, a voice broke through the static, not loud, not growling, not dramatic. Soft. Breathy. Almost curious. Wrong man. The line cut. The suspect doubled over, shaking violently. Sloan backed toward the wall, face pale. Ramirez felt the ground shift beneath him, as if the storm itself had tilted the world. Behind the glass, one of the tech officers shouted, "We traced the transmission." Sloan barked, "Where?" The officer turned slowly, horror dawning across his face. It came from inside the building. A silence fell so thick it seemed to crush the air. "Where in the building?" Ramirez demanded. The officer swallowed. Sublevel storage. Old evidence rooms. The ones that flood during heavy storms. The suspect whispered, "That's where he hides. Where the power goes first. Where the air is still." Ramirez stood. "Lock this floor down," he ordered, voice ice cold. "Arm every officer. We're sweeping sublevel storage. Now." But before anyone moved, the lights flickered again. Then dimmed. Then steadied. The storm howled with renewed fury. And from the interview room's vent, a faint sound drifted through. 3 off-key notes. Hummed slowly. Deliberately. The suspect covered his ears and screamed. Ramirez didn't scream. But for the first time in his career, he felt certain of something beyond evidence, beyond logic, beyond reason. They were not alone in the building. The moment the humming drifted through the vent, the entire interview room froze, not with the panic of people sensing danger, but with the deeper, more visceral terror of people realizing danger was already inside with them. The suspect's scream reverberated off the steel table, raw and animalistic, his shackled hands desperately covering his ears as if the sound alone could pull him backward in time to the night he chased the storm's phantom through the tree line. Ramirez shot out of his chair, eyes snapping to the vent. The humming faded, replaced by the hollow rattle of wind shoving through the ductwork, but now the wind sounded wrong. Too rhythmic. Too controlled. As if someone were crawling through the ventilation system with deliberate, measured movements. "Get him out of here," Ramirez barked, motioning to the officers outside. "Secure him in holding." 2 officers rushed in, hurling the suspect to his feet. His legs gave out halfway to the door, trembling uncontrollably, but they dragged him into the hallway, his screams dissolving into whimpers as the humming inside the vents thrummed like a distant heartbeat. Sloan appeared in the doorway, gun drawn, radio in hand. "Sublevel storage is sealed. SWAT's on their way. Nobody gets in or out." Ramirez didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on the vent, a square of dark metal humming with the residual echo of a predator who should not have been able to breach the building unseen. A predator whose DNA they had only just discovered. A predator who had left a badge on Ramirez's car like a calling card. "This isn't possible," Sloan muttered. "No one gets in without badge access." Ramirez pointed at the evidence bag containing the forged maintenance badge. "You really think a man who forged school access badges in 2003 couldn't walk right past our front desk today?" Sloan stiffened. The storm slammed against the building again, rattling the window frames. Emergency lights flickered. Distant officers shouted orders, but everything felt muffled, as if the storm itself was swallowing sound. Then a voice cut through the radio static. "Detectives," the dispatcher said breathlessly, "we're getting multiple sensor triggers in the sublevel corridor. Motion alarms, temperature shifts, ventilation fluctuations." "Any cameras?" Ramirez asked. "Negative. They're offline. All of them." Ramirez exchanged a look with Sloan, one that didn't require words. The predator wasn't running. The predator was hunting. Move, Ramirez ordered. We're sweeping the sublevel. They rushed into the hallway, where officers clustered in nervous groups, weapons drawn, listening to the storm breathe through the building. The suspect had been seated against the wall, hands trembling violently. Ramirez paused in front of him. Look at me. The suspect lifted his head, tears streaking down his face. Ramirez spoke firmly. You said he wouldn't come here to kill you. No, the suspect croaked. He won't kill me. Not while you're watching. That sent ice through Ramirez's spine. What does he want? He demanded. The suspect's eyes went wide, haunted. To see which one of you recognizes him. Before Ramirez could question him further, a gunshot cracked through the building. One shot. Then a scream. Then silence. South stairwell, an officer shouted. Sublevel access. Ramirez sprinted down the corridor, Sloan on his heels. The emergency lights bathed the stairwell in a pulsing red glow. The storm boomed overhead like rolling artillery. They reached the stairwell door, unlocked, slightly ajar, cold air seeping through the crack. Sweep it, Ramirez whispered. 2 officers pushed in first, rifles up. The stairwell spiraled downward, lit only by thin slivers of flickering light. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling on each step. The walls vibrated from the storm's weight. As they descended, Ramirez noticed something smeared on the railing. Dirt. Wet soil. The same soil found on the maintenance badge. They reached the bottom of the stairwell. The sublevel corridor stretched out before them, the old evidence wing, unused for years, filled with locked rooms, flooded tiles, mold creeping along the ceiling. The lights flickered like dying fireflies. Movement. A shadow passed at the far end of the hall. Stop. Police, an officer shouted. But the shadow didn't run. It simply slipped sideways, disappearing into the darkness between 2 doors. Ramirez and Sloan moved in formation, hearts pounding, weapons raised. Thunder cracked overhead. Somewhere above them, officers scrambled through upper floors, unaware of how close the danger truly was. Then, as they passed the second evidence room, a faint humming drifted from behind the door. 3 off-key notes. Slow. Deliberate. Sloan whispered, that's him. They kicked the door open. Empty. The humming continued, now behind them. Ramirez spun, gun raised, pulse slamming in his ears. Nothing. Only shadows. Only stormlight pulsing along the walls. Thermal. Sloan ordered. A tech officer scanned the hallway with a thermal imager. Detecting residual heat signatures along the ceiling vents, and the officer swallowed. Something colder than ambient. Moving. Where? Ramirez demanded. The officer pointed shakily downward. Under the floor. Sloan frowned. Under? Before anyone could react, a low creak sounded beneath their feet, as if the old tiles were shifting under a weight. The humming grew louder. Ramirez shouted, a fall back. Tiles buckled. A metal grate snapped. And a figure lunged upward from the darkness of the maintenance crawlspace. Chaos exploded. Officers stumbled back, weapons raised, shouting. The figure didn't fully emerge, only an arm, pale and drenched, reaching out with unnatural precision. For one horrifying second, Ramirez saw the curve of a scar behind the ear as the head turned just enough for the emergency lights to catch it. Then the figure dropped back into the crawl space. Gone. Disappearing through the underfloor tunnels like a spider retreating into a hidden nest. Ramirez threw himself toward the grate, but only darkness stared back. Seal the corridor. Sloan yelled. He's using maintenance ducts. The tech officer shook his head in disbelief. Those tunnels run beneath the entire precinct. He could be anywhere. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Almost going out. And as the hallway dimmed, something slid across the tiles from the darkness ahead. A piece of laminated plastic. Ramirez approached cautiously, weapon raised. It wasn't another badge. It was a page torn from a school directory. The girls' school. Her choir class list. And one name, circled in what looked like wet dirt. A name Ramirez had never seen before. A name unconnected to the suspect. A name unmentioned in the original case. A name that made every detective feel the ground tilt beneath them. Sloane's voice broke. This student wasn't interviewed in 2003. Why wasn't he in the original files? Ramirez's stomach twisted. Because he withdrew 2 days before the disappearance. The suspect's voice echoed from the stairwell behind them, trembling. That's him. That's who he followed first. The boy with the cardboard project. Sloane whispered, horrified. He wasn't stalking her. He was stalking him. The pieces slammed together like thunder. The predator hadn't targeted the girl at random. He'd been watching another child entirely. But when the storm came, when the power failed, when their paths crossed, the girl became the one he could take. Ramirez's pulse roared in his ears. This changes everything. Lightning lit up the hallway, flashing white across their faces. And then, through the ventilation shaft above them, 3 notes. Soft. Off-key. Hummed downward like a warning. Or a promise. Ramirez stared up into the darkness. He finally understood. The storm wasn't hiding him. The storm was guiding him. And they had just stepped directly into its path. The humming faded as quickly as it came, swallowed by the labyrinth of ventilation ducts above the sublevel corridor. Ramirez stood motionless beneath the grated ceiling, gun raised, eyes locked on the darkness overhead. The emergency lights pulsed red against the floor, illuminating the wet dirt smeared across the tiles like crude brushstrokes. Officers held their breath. The storm outside roared in violent surges, rain hammering the roof, thunder cracking with the force of artillery. But down here, beneath the precinct, another storm churned silently. The page from the choir directory lay at Ramirez's feet, the circled name bleeding faint dirt into the laminate. A boy. Withdrawn days before the disappearance. Uninterviewed. Unsearched for. Unnoticed. Sloane crouched to examine it. He must have followed that kid weeks before, he murmured. Maybe months. Maybe longer. Ramirez forced the words out. The girl, she wasn't his intended target. No, Sloane said. She was the one the storm isolated. The suspect had been right. Every detail now pointed toward a predator who didn't choose victims by opportunity alone. He chose them by pattern. By routine. By predictability. A boy who walked home with the same cardboard project every week, rain or shine, taking the same route. A creature of habit in a world full of chaos. The girl was simply the one the storm handed him. An officer approached, face pale. Detectives, the crawl space maps aren't accurate. The tunnels are older than the precinct schematics. Some sections collapse during heavy rain. Others connect to storm drains and runoff channels that lead well basically anywhere. Ramirez swore under his breath. So he's beneath the entire city. Potentially, the officer said. But he came up through maintenance ducts to leave this. He pointed to the directory page. He could be within 20 feet of us, or a mile away. Sloane scanned the hall nervously. He's playing with us. He wants to show he can slip in and out like vapor. No, Ramirez said quietly. He's telling us where to look next. For a moment, no one spoke. The emergency lights flickered again, bathing the corridor in a heartbeat rhythm. Get this page analyzed, Ramirez ordered. Prints, soil composition, anything. I want the circled name cross-checked, home address, former school files, withdrawal papers. Everything. Officers scrambled to comply. Ramirez turned to Sloane. Where was the boy living at the time? Sloane flipped through the old directory digitally. A neighborhood near the eastern wetland belt. Lots of older houses, some abandoned. Storms hit that area harder than others. Fewer streetlights. A perfect hunting ground. Map every severe weather event overlapping that neighborhood for the last 30 years, Ramirez said. Cross-reference with missing person reports, official or not. Any child who went missing even briefly. Anyone who reappeared soaked and confused. Sloane nodded and sprinted for the stairs. Ramirez braced one hand against the wall, the weight of 2 decades crashing into him. For years they had hunted the wrong ghost, chasing a man who had only tried to intervene. A man whose silence had damned him because he believed no one would ever understand what he'd seen. But now the real predator was awake. A storm crow circling overhead. Watching their every move. Sir, an officer said hesitantly. There's something else. Ramirez forced himself upright. What? The officer pointed toward the stairwell. The suspect is asking for you. They found him in a holding cell, curled on the bench like a man bracing for impact. When Ramirez entered, the suspect lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red, haunted. He's not leaving, the suspect whispered. Not tonight. Ramirez folded his arms. Explain. He's testing you. Testing whether you see what he sees. His voice dropped. He's always believed storms reveal people's true selves. Those who panic. Those who freeze. Those who remember. Remember what? Ramirez pressed. Patterns, the suspect murmured. He believes the world runs on loops. That storms break loops open. That he can slip inside them and find what nobody else sees. There's no logic to that, Ramirez said. The suspect's laugh was hollow. You still think he operates like a normal man? Ramirez leaned closer. Tell me something useful. Tell me how he chooses. The suspect's eyes glazed with memory. He watches for confidence. Kids who think storms can't touch them. Kids who walk without looking back. Kids who trust routines too much. And adults? Ramirez asked. The suspect shook his head. Adults complicate things. Adults make noise. Adults ask questions. He swallowed. Except you. Ramirez stiffened. What do you mean? He's studying you now. Waiting to see if you're predictable. If your thinking follows patterns he can predict. Because if it does, he shuddered. You'll never catch him. He'll always be one storm ahead. Ramirez straightened, jaw tightening. Then we'll stop following patterns. The suspect's eyes widened with something like hope or fear. Then hurry. Thunder detonated overhead, so loud it rattled the steel bars. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then steadied. A loud knock echoed through the hallway. Ramirez spun. Sloane approached at a jog, holding a tablet. We found something, he said breathlessly. The boy from the directory, he didn't just withdraw. His family filed a relocation request after reporting a break-in attempt. A break-in? Ramirez repeated. Yes. Someone tried to force the back door. Storm night. No prints. No tracks. Ramirez whispered he was hunting him long before Clearwater. That's not all, as Sloane said. The family moved again 6 months later. No forwarding address. Why? Ramirez asked. Because the boy started sleepwalking. Multiple nights. Always toward windows. A quiet horror washed over Ramirez. Like someone was calling to him. Sloane's face paled. There's more. A neighbor's statement they once heard humming outside the boy's window. 3 notes. The room fell into silence. He's been circling his targets for years, as Sloane said. Sometimes not acting immediately. Sometimes waiting for the storm that suits him. Ramirez exhaled, cold spreading through his chest. We need to find that family. We're trying, as Sloane said. But the trail goes cold. They changed names. Moved counties. They may have left the state. Which means, Ramirez muttered, we're back to zero. Sloane hesitated. Not exactly. He handed Ramirez a new file. Inside was a map, current storm trajectory. The storm outside wasn't random. It was moving directly toward one place. The wetland belt. The neighborhood where the boy used to live. Sarah Sloane said, voice low. He might be returning to finish what he started. Ramirez stared at the map, pulse pounding. Or he already has. They gathered officers, loaded gear, and prepared vehicles. The storm battered the city with increasing fury. Debris rolled across streets. Street lamps flickered and died. Rain blurred the windshield into streaks of silver. As they reached the precinct lobby, a deputy ran toward them. Detective Ramirez. You need to see this. She held a small evidence bag. Inside it was a new sheet of paper, wet, smeared with dirt, folded once. We found this taped to the south exit, Ishi said. Fresh. Probably minutes old. Ramirez opened it. Hand-drawn lines. A map. Crude. Shaky. Showing the wetland belt. A specific street. A specific house. And written at the bottom, in jagged, uneven handwriting. You're late again. Sloane paled. He's baiting us. No, Ramirez said. He's calling us. The suspect's voice rose from behind them. He had been escorted for transport and overheard everything. He's choosing you, he whispered. You're the one he wants to show the ending to. Ramirez turned. Because I'm leading the case? No, the suspect's voice cracked. Because you're predictable. Ramirez froze. Thunder swallowed the moment, shaking the ground beneath them. Sloane stepped forward. Sir, we need to move. Now. Ramirez closed the evidence bag, securing it with shaking hands. Gear up. We're heading to the wetlands. The storm screamed. Somewhere beneath its roar, faint and distant yet unmistakable, 3 off-key notes hummed through the night. The road into the wetlands twisted like a dark artery through the storm, each bend swallowed by sheets of rain that pounded the cruiser's windshield with a relentless fury. Every flash of lightning illuminated the tall grasses bowing violently under the wind, their shadows stretching across the asphalt like the fingers of something submerged. The wipers fought to keep up, smearing water aside in frantic strokes, but visibility never improved. It felt less like driving forward and more like descending into the heart of the storm itself. Ramirez gripped the wheel tighter. Sloane monitored the tracker pinging the address scrawled on the dirt-stained map. Officers followed in a staggered convoy, lights off to avoid alerting whoever waited for them in the wetlands. The convoy moved silently except for the roaring wind, the rattling windows, the muted static of radios struggling against the storm. What's the layout of the house? Ramirez asked. Old structure, as Sloane said, scrolling through the blueprint. Unrenovated. Back porch collapses during heavy storms. Power grid unreliable. Plenty of blind corners. Anne? He hesitated. Ramirez glanced over. And what? Sloane exhaled. Storm drains run directly under the property. They connect to the old maintenance tunnels. A perfect escape route. Or a perfect trap. Lightning slashed the sky again, revealing the silhouette of the house perched against the wetland's edge. Dark. Still. Windows hollow and unlit. A place that looked less abandoned and more expectant. Like someone had been waiting inside it long before the storm arrived. As the convoy halted, officers stepped out, rain instantly slamming into them, soaking their uniforms. Ramirez raised his radio, but the signal fractured. Inside the storm's interference zone, a Sloane muttered. We might lose comms entirely. Ramirez nodded grimly. Pairs of 2. Sweep the perimeter. Eyes sharp. His not just hiding. His watching. Officers split off, disappearing into the storm's roar. Ramirez and Sloane approached the front porch, their boots sinking into mud softened by the deluge. The steps groaned beneath their weight. The door hung crooked, swollen by years of humidity, but the lock was new, newer than the building, newer than the neighborhood, a metallic glint cutting through the rot. He's been here recently, a Sloane whispered. Ramirez motioned. They breached. The door slammed inward, and the house swallowed them like a lung inhaling air. Darkness. Silence. Then, a faint hum. 3 soft notes drifting through the hallway, low and uneven, vibrating through the walls themselves. Sloane's breath hitched. He knows we're here. The 2 detectives swept forward. Each room felt colder than the last, furniture overturned, wallpaper sloughing from the walls, mildew clawing at the floors. The storm rattled every window, making the house vibrate with its heartbeat. But something felt wrong. Too wrong. Too empty. Too staged. Ramirez crouched beside the remains of a desk, brushing away wet dirt. A footprint. Fresh. Leading deeper into the house. He wants us to follow, Ramirez muttered. Sloane swallowed. Or he wants us trapped. They moved deeper. The humming grew louder. Then it stopped. Suddenly. Abruptly. As if someone had placed a hand over the storm's mouth. Ramirez felt the hairs on his arms rise. Detective, as Sloane whispered. Look. At the end of the hallway, beside a half-collapsed doorway, was a wooden chair. On the chair was a stack of old files. Wet. But intact. Ramirez approached cautiously. The top file slid open under his hand. Inside were pages from old school rosters.